obviously, funny enough, I found a picture of my mom lighting the menorah, and this is Elan and I. Elan naturally is more gregarious and smiling. As you can see, I'm not amused at my picture.
Wow,
But
that's
that's it. But how was that? To find a picture of my mom lighting a menorah. It was such a hashgacha pratis.
Jeez.
But Damien,
Nice. So that was.
But Damien, you haven't changed. I mean, it's the same face. It's just a bit older.
Thanks. Yeah. All right. So, guys, listen, we're going to get started quickly. I just want to share a couple of ideas that I learned from Rabbi Akiva Tatz. Obviously, I can't give it over like Rabbi Akiva Tatz. But some of these ideas that Rabbi Akiva Tatz gave over was from his Rabbi Moshe Shapiro, who was his teacher. So what we're going to do is we're going to just discuss a couple of the contradictions between the Hellenistic Greek-Roman mindset, which is the modern world, versus the Jewish mindset of how we see physicality versus spiritual beauty. Okay. So just to give you a little bit of a background, is that most of the time people think that it's a very, very superficial sort of mindset, where the Greek mindset, it doesn't have much depth, etc. But it's not quite so clear cut as that. And I just want to give you a couple of proofs that are actually quite interesting. Is that the Rambam wrote a book called the Guide for the Perplexed, or the Guide to the Perplexed, depending on how it's translated. And within the beginning part of it, he actually mentions, believe it or not, that Aristotle's 26 propositions. So the fact that the Rambam himself mentioned 26 propositions by Aristotle means that this guy was no intellectual midget, believe me. Even when we have a case where we look at Achav that went a little bit off the rails, who was Rabbi Akiva's contemporary, still merited to visit the orchards in Olam Haba, whatever that means. It means he reached the spiritual level where I think 3 of them went out, 1 went mad, 1 died, and 1 came back intact. And Achav was one of the ones that actually came back intact. And so to reach that sort of level, part of his learning, as well as obviously Torah Judaism, is it said that his Greek philosophical learning was actually coming off all his pages, that you could see that he was saturated within that mindset, imbued within a Torah mindset. So there are subtleties, and it's not as grotesque as one would imagine. Okay. Stephen, please, I'm just putting you on mute. I hope you don't mind. Okay. Let me just get back to what I was saying. So everything that we have in terms of the modern world is pretty much Greek and Roman in origin. So how it worked with the Roman Empire is as follows: is Rome was basically a military force, and within that military force, they took on Greek culture. If you look at the Greek gods and the Roman gods, they obviously switched the names, etc. But a lot of the anthropomorphic qualities they gave to the gods, so to speak, were about human dramas that were unfolding. Even if you have a look at the democratic system that we have currently in America, the first Senate, in fact, wasn't in America, it was in Greece. And then Rome adopted a Senate with the Caesarship rule at times. And just like America, where people have the illusion of free choice and many powerful people and lobbyist groups work in the background to strike deals for economic benefit, it was the same in the Greek and Roman Empire. So most of the world today mimics that. And not only that, but Plato and Aristotle themselves specifically laid forward modern science, not just philosophy, but the principles of science in terms of mathematics, the constructs of logic, the constructs of science. So it would be hard-pressed, Rabbi Tatz said, to just automatically throw it off and assume that there's nothing of merit or wisdom within the Greek culture. For the simple reason is as follows, is that if you look at people that have, corrupted human history, they generally don't tell what you call a full lie, because something that is a full lie nobody would buy into. It's generally true with a hint of untruth or a hint of logical inaccuracies mixed within it. But if there was no truth within it, there would be no buy-in whatsoever. So we've got to realize that most of the arguments that were around at the time of the Gemara and just before were between Hellenistic Jews, which were the biggest proponents of Hellenism, even more than the Greeks. I mean, often you'll find in a secular society a case where the most democratic, liberal, anti-Israel people in America are the Jews themselves. Generally, right-wing conservative Christians are pro-Israel. And nothing was different exactly in that particular point. So with this, I'd like to just obviously go through some of the discussions on the Gemara of the differences between the cultures, etc. And one of the subjects that I wanted to issue is this contradiction that we have within the Torah itself between physical and spiritual beauty. Okay. So, for example, problem number one is the Torah actually brings very specific examples to emphasize the physical beauty of our matriarchs and other holy women. I'll give you some examples. When it looks at Abraham's wife and it talks about Sarah or Sarai Menu, it says that other human beings look like monkeys in comparison to her. And it was actually talking about physical looks. And if you want to have the argument and say that the Chumash merely mentions this because Abraham, when he went down and descended to Egypt, it obviously affected his spiritual level. And to a certain extent, it was the first time he noticed his wife's physical beauty. He was very much obviously in love with her spiritual beauty. And maybe the reason that the Chumash mentioned it was Sarah's looks was just to illustrate the fact that Pharaoh wanted Sarah as his wife. And obviously Pharaoh wasn't interested in her spiritual beauty. He was purely attracted to her sexually. And maybe that's why her physical beauty was mentioned. But then the problem arises that if there's a practical reason to tell us of her beauty in that particular case, how do you explain other cases of the Chumash where physical beauty is emphasized? I'll give you an example. If you look at Yaakov, his wife Rachel, the Midrashim emphasize her beauty, and immediately in the next pasuk it said, and Yaakov loved her. Immediately after it mentions her physical beauty, which leads to the illusion that he loved her also because of her physical beauty, and that does provide an issue which is problematic, especially on his level. If you even have a look at the commentary on the Ramban, Nachmanides, it comments on Dinah's beauty. Dinah being Yaakov's daughter that was raped. The reason why it doesn't mention it openly, as Rabbi Moshe Shapiro mentions, is that because Dinah was raped, we never want to come to the conclusion that her beauty enticed it or caused it in any manner that she was certainly deserved it. But that's why the Ramban mentions it separately in the commentary. But the fact of it is Ramban does concentrate on Dinah's beauty, physical beauty. And the same thing, if you look at Rachav, who married Yeshua, it describes her physical beauty to the extent that it said that men couldn't even control their physical urges, just thinking about her, never mind seeing her. If you look at David Amelech's wife, Abigail, it said that David can travel at the speed of 10 miles per light just to catch the beauty of her leg. Whatever that means in allegorical terms, what it certainly means is that she was beautiful enough that he felt like he could just cross boundaries of strength, just inspired by the pure physical beauty that she had. Even if you have a look at a male example, Yosef was described as being so physically beautiful that the Egyptian woman used to climb walls and grated their hands instead of grating potatoes if they happened to gaze at him while they were doing housework. If you have a look even on the case of Purim, it describes Esther's physical beauty. So the problem that arises is, why would the Torah seem to emphasize our matriarchs and other holy women's physical beauty when the Torah is about truth and the essence of the soul, and that physical beauty fades, and it's a transient piece of meat basically covering an eternal soul. So I just want to give you some insights into how the Gemara tackles this issue broadly. And it says the first thing that you've got to consider is that you've got to see history as a 6,000 year span. So that history basically from the revelation at creation, and Har Sinai was known as the strongest point. It's referred to as the head of, almost the Kabbalistic head of time, because that's being the source of creation of the beginning and then the giving over the Torah. And the Mashiach is described as the feet. And why is it described as the feet? Actually, Purim as a festival is described as the right leg and Chanukah as the left leg, because we went to a period of going from open miracles to natural looking miracles. And the Gemara describes legs as being considered mainly redundant. It's essential that it takes you from point A to B, but it's your upper body. It says basically from the genitals up is what you use for procreation, thought, emotional feeling, intellect, using your hands to obviously create things, etc. So what happened is Purim came before Chanukah, and there was a period at about 355 BCE where the Hashem changed the nature of the world. Prior to that period, the world had open miracles. And from about 355, 350 BCE, when Purim came about, we relied more on hashgacha pratis, on hidden miracles, that if you wanted to find a logical reason for it, you could. But if you were sensitive enough, you could see Hashem's hand in human affairs. One of the proofs of this is that Hashem's name is not written in the Megillah. And the Megillah obviously came before even Chanukah. So basically, Esther stands at the junction of human history, where we went from Hashem choosing to reveal himself to where he chose to hide himself. And basically, the fact of it is if you look at, there were two ways that Hashem decided to reveal himself. The first way is that he would speak through us. He would speak to us through prophecy. In other words, through the prophets, and he would act with us through miracles. So speech was the mechanism that he would use to convey his words and his thoughts. And miracles were the way that he would convey his action in manipulating the physical in order to help intervene against the natural order of things. So obviously we know of Esther that brought about Purim, but Yehudit was the woman that started the Maccabee rebellion against the wicked Greek Empire. So basically, Rabbi Tatz described it as that men create the initial spark, such as sperm, and it's a woman that carries the fetus into birth and actuality in the world. So what does this have to do with beauty? Is because we using an example of Esther as to whether or not we're grappling with, is it about physical beauty or is it about spiritual beauty? So as far as the Gemara is concerned, is that we're not actually sure. There's a debate amongst the Amoraim in the Gemara as to whether Esther was beautiful or not. So the one opinion is that Esther was one of the four most beautiful women that had ever existed. And the other opinion is that she wasn't pretty at all. In fact, she had a greenish face and complexion. I don't know if you know this, but when some people wear silver jewelry, their skin becomes like tainted with a bit of a greenish, bluish hue. Some people can't wear jewelry because the ammonia that their bodies produce are in excess of most normal people's chemical reaction, just as a matter of interest. So Rav Dessler brings this point in the Gemara, and he says that in Strive for Truth, that when you have more than one version of relevance, where they're almost diametrically opposed, both of those hold true, because they're just different facets of the same argument. Just like jewelry, you have different facets of a diamond. And in fact, the Midrash Rabbah says that Esther, apart from the fact that she had a slight greenish tinge, she was 75 years old and married and competing with women that were virgins in their teens. Plus, if you learn from the Mamlues, they had about 6 months of pre-pampering of oils and perfumes and treatments for these teenage girls that wanted to look their very best prior to this big beauty concept that Achashverosh had. So Achashverosh was Xerxes the First of Persia, And if anything, Esther ironically needed beauty, unlike the other cases of our holy woman. Why? Because in order to catch Achashverosh's attention, she had to look stunning. So it would be very strange at a period of time when we were not looking at open miracles. In other words, if we were looking at a time of open miracles, it's easy to understand why somebody ugly could have got the opinion of the king, because in that particular stage we were up to open miracles, and it wouldn't have seemed out of the ordinary. It would just be another miracle. But because obviously the Purim was entering the phase already of no open miracles, it was peculiar that Achashverosh would fall in love with somebody that was 75, greenish, not pretty, and married, compared to 18-year-old virgins. So the Gemara is grappling with these points. And the irony is the same Torah that seem to emphasize on a lot of our women the physical beauty, say sheker echem v'hevel yofi. Charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting. That's from, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. This is from Shlomo Melech. It's part of Tanakh. And yet, in the same vein of saying that charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting, it also talks about the exquisite physical beauty of these holy women. And the Torah, obviously, in many places says, don't judge a vessel by the outside, but by its contents, etc., etc. So this extreme contradiction is problematic. If you look at Talmud Nedarim Daf Nun, I just want to bring a particular case. There was Yeshua ben Hananiah. So he was a great sage of the Mishnah, but unfortunately he was extremely ugly. And there was a daughter of the Roman governor who asked him, how can such a spiritual great man, a man of wisdom, be contained in such physical ugliness? She couldn't understand how you could have such a dichotomy. And Rabbi Moshe Shapira said it's very interesting that a woman asked him this question, because women are sensitive. They've got bina when it comes to having a quality and a talent for beauty, in that, you can have men that can organize well, but if you look at a male army barracks, it's organized, but it certainly doesn't look home. It doesn't look like home. Whereas if you look at a home, it's part of the essential nature of the aestheticism as well. So she asked it both because she was a woman and that Greek culture emphasizes aesthetic beauty. So when she asked him this question, that how could somebody that's so ugly be able to contain such spiritual greatness and wisdom, we basically wanted to know what was the Jewish view and how would that look? How would the two of them go together? So this is how the question is framed, okay? Is that there's a discussion in the art world that says, does a beautiful painting, take the Mona Lisa, for example, does it need a beautiful frame to accentuate the painting? Or does the beautiful frame actually detract from the beautiful painting? So this is what the Roman woman was thinking along these lines, that a great inner beauty needs an equally beautiful outer vessel. Basically just to accentuate the inner beauty, and the two of them must actually be in harmony with one another. So interestingly enough, Rabbi Yeshua ben Hananiah answered her as follows. He said, tell me, your father, who's the governor, he's a very powerful man. What sort of vessel does he keep his most expensive wine in? So she said he keeps it in a clay earthenware vessel, and it's sealed with wax to ensure its longevity. The rabbi said to him, maybe your father should keep such valuable wine in vessels that are more fitting for it. Maybe put it in gold or silver vessels because it's more fitting for the wine. So anyway, this Roman noblewoman decided that she was going to go back to her father's wine cellar and order the wine steward to put them all in gold and silver. Needless to say, the expensive wine was absolutely ruined. Why? Because expensive metal vessels react with the chemicals of the wine. So obviously her father wasn't happy, he summoned the guards to go and arrest Rabbi Yeshua, and he was brought before him to explain why he would give his daughter such costly bad advice. So all Rabbi Yeshua explained to her is that the prelude conversation of what his daughter had asked him, and the rabbi just said, I try to show your daughter that when the outer vessel tries to make its own statement, and basically when it comes in conflict with the wine, it ends up ruining its inner contents. The only way that the wine can remain remotely pure and unadulterated is to have no contact with the outer vessel on a competitive level. When the outer vessel is competing with the inner vessel, the inner contents end up going to be compromised and damaged. And the entire purpose of a vessel, what is the purpose of a vessel? To house its contents. And if it doesn't compete for importance in that arena, and it knows the purpose of what it's been created for, in other words, to have a container that fills its purpose successfully, that's the entire point. But she didn't buy it. The Roman noble woman didn't buy it because she turned around to him and she said, listen, I know a lot of very high level rabbis that are extremely beautiful. One of the people she was thinking of was Shmuel, who was the Kohen Gadol, who was so good looking that the Caesar's daughter begged her father to spare him so that she could have relations with him. And obviously the Kohen Gadol was having no such thing. So then she allowed him to be executed, but not before she took the front cover of his face and had it flayed off with hot metal so she could preserve his good looks and look at it like a painting wherever she saw fit. So she was using this case as an example, this Roman governor's daughter about the Caesar's daughter. And another example, Rav Yochanan, who was called the beautiful one of Yerushalayim. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania responded to her as follows. He said, had they been ugly, they would have been even wiser. You think they were wise when they were beautiful looking? It was nothing compared to the wisdom they would have had and the depth they would have had if they focused solely on the spiritual and weren't distracted by the physical. So this statement is basically the definitive view of the Gemara and Mishnah. And our sages debating the Greeks on this very point, as obviously the conclusion is that looks and externalities are problematic, and it is a challenge to spiritual growth. Look, at the very least, it's a distractant. So the core focus needs to be on our inner souls. But then we have that tremendous contradiction. What do we mean? The Torah basically emphasizes feminine physical beauty, as in the case, as I said, of our matriarchs and Eve, and that's problematic in itself. And then the Torah runs down beauty as extremely problematic. So Rabbi Tatz actually said that this issue bothered him for many years until his rabbi, the late Rabbi Moshe Shapiro, answered his question. And afterwards, Rabbi Tatz actually wrote a book, for those of you that want to know, on the subject. It's basically called As Dawn Ends the Night. So that's a term from the Gemara, which actually emphasizes mankind's timeline and talks about how physical beauty has changed. You know, obviously at the time of Adam HaRishon, the physical beauty and the spiritual beauty were harmonious. And then obviously after the sin of Adam HaRishon, there became a conflict between the physical and the spiritual. However, the one thing that we've got to understand is that Jewish people embrace this issue of the tension between the beauty of physicality and spirituality. Again, if you look at the Catholic priests, they abstain from sex, from marriage, from parenthood. The Muslims, they abstain from touching alcohol. The Buddhists, they run away. They go and meditate in the mountains. They run away from human responsibility. And if you have a look at all the other religions, generally their way of nirvana or reaching the spiritual pinnacle is to ignore the physical. The Jewish way is to elevate the physical. Why? We have our Brit Milah to use our genitals for holy context of marriage to bring up children. We do kiddush on alcohol, on wine. We do acts of chesed instead of going to run away to the mountains to achieve some selfish nirvana. So we also have a concept of resurrection of the dead, because the body too deserves its reward for doing mitzvahs, not just the soul. That's exactly why we have Techilas Amesim. And I just want to quickly end off on a particular discussion that Gavin and I learned in Sanhedrin 91b. So it was a discussion between Rebbe, who's the editor of the Mishnah, and Marcus Aurelius, which is known as Antoninus in the Gemara. And Antoninus basically said to Rebbe, I will show you how after death you will completely exempt yourself from all punishment, because death means body and soul are separated. So the body's in the ground decomposing and the soul's in the ethereal realm. And so the Greek view is duality. So when the body and soul separate, God comes to judge the soul. The soul in its defense can say, what do you want from me? If it wasn't for the body, I wouldn't have sinned. And when God goes to judge the body will respond, this isn't my fault. I'm just a vessel of muscle and bone, and I'm responding to the commands of the soul. I'm just responding to instructions. And each will blame the other correctly, and God won't be able to punish you. So Rebbe listened to this very carefully, and he responded with the following, and I'm going to end off on this note. He said, you're wrong. He said, there was once a king who had a beautiful orchard of figs. He's giving a moshel here, analogy. And he employed 2 guards to protect the orchard because he didn't trust anybody. So both of these guards had defects. The one was lame and the one was blind. So these 2 guards conspired to steal and eat all the figs. So the lame man climbed upon the shoulders of the blind man, and using the blind man's ability to walk and the lame man's ability to see, they stole all the figs. And the king saw both of them eventually lying under the tree. You can see they'd been eating figs. Their mouth was stained with fig juice. So they decided to beat a confession out of them. And under confession, the lame man turned around and said, listen, Your Majesty, it's not my fault. I couldn't have done this because I can't walk properly. So how am I going to move stealthily and swiftly to pick up the fruits? And then when the king went to the blind man, he had the same excuse. He said, how can I steal when I can't even see my way around? So what did the king do? He had his guards put the lame man on the shoulders of the blind man, and he beat them both together. He said, you perpetrated the sin as a team, and this is where your recompense is given. And it's an analogy to the fact that you do mitzvahs and averos in this world, and a composite tension of the teaming of a human body and soul. So to understand really what a human being is, it's not just a body and it's not just a soul, it's the composite of both. And just so that you know, there's a famous work by Bernard Williams, who wrote a book called Problems of the Self, which discusses this balance between needing both the body and the soul to obviously achieve a level of perfection, because that's the test at which we were given. And before I end off on this note, I just wanted to share with you something that it was very funny. And at this point, I just want to unmute you. Guys, can you just unmute yourselves a second? I'm not going to take much more of your time, but you know, this was an issue I was actually, remember, Elan's got a good memory. I remember chatting to you, Elan, this was years ago. It was back in the day of Wendy and Greg and everybody. And I was always fascinated because at school, you always see those that are popular and those that are good looking, okay? And they seem to coast through easier. Those that are socially awkward and are not born extremely good looking, etc. You know what the first thing they do is when somebody's not good looking, they say he's got a great personality. You know that person isn't a looker. But there's a deep truth to it, because a person that isn't good looking, unfortunately or fortunately, has to work on other skill sets like social and emotional adeptness to be able to develop character. And initially, I thought to be born extremely good looking was an absolute blessing and not a curse. But it is a curse, because if I was born like a Roman Adonis, I don't know if I wouldn't have ended up getting up to mischief with 1,000,000 girls. I don't know. I might have ended up destroying my soul. The reality is, I'm no oil painting, and I got born the way I'm born, and this one's born the way they're born, and you're stuck with what you're stuck with. But the reality is, it's not so funny, because many people that I see today that were good looking, their looks have faded. They're on their 3rd divorce. They go from one partner to the next. They think the partner's the problem. I feel sorry for the ugly partner because the ugly partner is just as shallow because he went out with a good-looking partner because he's no less superficial. So they both feed off each other's negativity. It's a disaster made in hell, as opposed to falling in love with somebody's character. So obviously looks and chemistry do form a part, but you must know that as well as being a blessing, to be good-looking is a hell of a challenge and a curse. And it was just this idea of the Greek Hellenistic view versus the Jewish view, I thought was a lovely theme on Chanukah, although I can't do justice to Rabbi Moshe Shapiro and Rabbi Tatz, just discussing a few ideas.
And wishing you both of you long life and only simchas and much bracha and hatzlacha and everything you do.
Sure, both you guys.
Thank you. But you want to say
Really
something?
appreciate it.
Thank
And Damon, you're amazing, John. Really, spending time putting the shirt together, and I know you give your shirt on Gemara every day. It's unbelievable. And please God, mom will have an aliyah because all the learning that you've done this year, because it's definitely been more than mine. So please God, she has an aliyah, and due to your spit. Anyway,
And
thank
you know what, Elan, firstly, I want to take this opportunity to thank you because when Mom was sick, I promise you, you were an absolute godsend. I couldn't have, Elan, you you were incredible.
Damon, we shared it, and it is what it was. Thank you. But shkach to all of you guys for participating in this year in her honor, and
thank you.
Only a pleasure.
Thank you, my friend.
And Damon.